Okay, so this is my presentation called Reaching and Teaching All Learners, and it is focused on the simple view of reading. So this is the agenda that I created for the presentation. And the first slide then goes over the simple view of reading using this graphic from the Reading League. It is a framework that explains how children learn to read, and the main idea is that the purpose of reading is to understand what one reads. So it says that the decoding, which is word recognition, times language comprehension equals reading comprehension, which of course is the goal of reading. And it's important to note that this is a product and not a sum. Both parts of the equation must be present in order for comprehension to occur. The simple view of reading. The formula makes it clear that strong reading comprehension will not occur unless students have strong decoding and strong language comprehension skills. And here I've quoted from an article by Reading Rockets, which says we must teach students to decode expertly as early as possible. When students can decode expertly, their reading comprehension capabilities equal their language comprehension abilities. And we must provide students with strong content knowledge in many domains at all grade levels in order for them to develop adequate comprehension abilities. So if a student is struggling with reading, it's important to determine which piece of the equation is causing the difficulty and then to target the interventions appropriately. And the professional development session that I have created will give some additional tools so that teachers can provide students with this knowledge. So I based this on Scarborough's Reading Rope, which is a more detailed model of the simple view of reading. It further breaks down the components of language comprehension and word recognition. So today our main focuses will be the word recognition strand and the vocabulary knowledge and background knowledge pieces of the language comprehension strands. So in this model, language comprehension is the first part of the strand. Background knowledge, vocabulary knowledge, language structures, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. And it's bound together or woven together with the word recognition segment, which is phonological awareness, decoding and spelling, and sight recognition. And as those become increasingly strategic and increasingly automatic, you find skilled reading, a fluent execution and coordination of word recognition and text comprehension. So as I mentioned, the professional development piece that I've planned for today, for the first day, will focus mostly on word recognition strand entirely, and then just the vocabulary knowledge and background knowledge parts of the language comprehension strand. So one of the first things I would do with this session is to have the participants work together as a team with their table or group, use materials provided to build and label a physical model of the reading rope, and then use the lesson descriptions provided and place them where you think they would fit on the rope. And I've seen this done with pipe cleaners or strands of yarn or ribbon or streamers, so I would use something like that for this presentation. The first strand we would talk about is word recognition, and the basis for the word recognition strand is going to be phonological awareness. David Kilpatrick, you're probably familiar with him from Equipped for Reading Success, says that research is clear. Students with good phonological awareness are in a great position to become good readers, while students with poor phonological awareness almost always struggle in reading. So obviously this is a major component of being a good reader. There are lots of components to phonological awareness, including word awareness, syllable, rhyme, alliteration for sound awareness, and phoneme awareness. Phoneme awareness is the ability to segment, blend, and manipulate the phonemes or sounds in a word, and that is the most critical. Kilpatrick goes on to say that while most children will develop this naturally, there's a good percentage, 30 to 40%, who won't without direct instruction. The direct instruction won't hurt any students, so it's really important that all students receive this training. And his book, Equipped for Reading Success, provides a step-by-step program. It has a past assessment that my school uses as a dyslexia screener. And then he provides 1-minute activities based on students' needs that show up from that past assessment. And then Louisa Moats, I see a typo there, I'll fix that, And her book, Speech to Print, points out that phonemic awareness is also critical because our alphabetic writing system represents language at the phoneme level. So readers and writers have to be aware of the speech sounds the letters represent, or they can't match the letters and sounds, and then they're not going to be able to read or write. Some ways to develop phonemic awareness: stating a compound word, such as firefly, and ask the student to repeat the word, firefly, and then ask them to say it again, but delete one of the parts. So you might say, okay, say firefly, now say firefly without the fire. You could give a multisyllabic word and ask the student to say the word but delete a given part, such as overtime, and ask them to take off the ove. You state a word and ask the student to segment it into phonemes, say cat, and now say the sounds in cat, or you state the phonemes separately, d, ah, g, ask the student to blend that into a word, or state a word and ask the student to replace one phoneme in the word with another. So if you wanted to say jump, and now change the j into a d, what do you get? The next strand in our reading rope is phonic decoding. It has been found, the research over the last several decades has shown that learning the alphabetic code is essential to learning to read, and phonics is best taught when it is systematic and explicit. So I'm quoting here Wiley Blevins from his book, A Fresh Look at Phonics. So it's very, very important that we actually teach the alphabetic code, not just try to teach in a whole language way where students are just expected to learn words as a whole. So that systematic portion means that the instruction builds from the simplest piece up to the most complex piece, with lots of time for review and time for mastery. And then explicit means that they're taught directly to the students rather than just expecting them to discover them on their own through osmosis, basically. And when children can apply their phonics skills to read fluently, as we know, they have the ability to focus more of their effort on comprehending the text rather than having to take the time to decode it. Lots of successful phonics programs are available, but when you evaluate a program, it's important to make sure that it is both systematic and explicit. Then I would ask the participants in my professional development section to discuss what phonics program they use, if they feel like it's effective, and why or why not. The next part in this section of the reading rope is sight word recognition. So most elementary students are expected to learn hundreds of high-frequency words by sight without having to pause to decode. We call them snap words, popcorn words, different things like that. But basically what we intend is for the student to look at the word and immediately know what that word says. And the most common lists of words that we use for this are the Dolch words or the Fry list, which have been researched to be the words that are the most common ones in our language. And typically the way we've done this in the past is students are taught to read these words by just being asked to memorize them wholesale as a whole piece. But new research has shown that we don't really learn to read by storing those visual images of words. Instead, we do something called orthographic mapping. Kilpatrick explains that process really nicely. It's the mental process we use to permanently store words for that immediately effortless retrieval. And what's interesting is that most of the words that we have thought of as irregular or cheater words or trick words or whatever we've called them, they actually only have one part of that word that is irregular. And in one of his books, Kilpatrick says he really has analyzed all these words. The vast majority of exception words have only a singular irregular letter-sound relationship. The rest of the word can be sounded out using our phonics knowledge, and there's only one little part that has to be learned by heart, by memory. So some of the newer things that I've seen are calling it a heart word strategy, that's a little part that you have to learn by heart. The rest of the word you can use your phonics knowledge for. There are several great websites that have programs for this and explain this really well. I've listed a few here: Really Great Reading, Readsters, Reading Rockets, all have great things to help you out with that. Then we would take a little break, let my participants have a snack, have some chatting, go to the bathroom, what have you, and then we would come back for the other section of our reading rope, the language comprehension section. So the first part of this that I talk about is the development of background knowledge. So a key aspect to being able to comprehend what one reads is to have sufficient prior or background knowledge. A book that I read that just absolutely has changed my entire way of thinking about teaching is The Knowledge Gap by Natalie Wexler. And she says that the most important factor in determining whether readers can understand a text is how much relevant vocabulary or background knowledge they have. She makes a really strong case for spending less time teaching those thinking skills like inferring or visualization and isolation. So rather than saying, okay, this month I'm going to teach inferring, next month I'm going to teach visualizing, the month after that I'm going to teach schema. Instead, she says what's important is to focus on teaching the content. Have a content-rich curriculum, lots of a strong science and social studies background, and then teach those comprehension skills as tools as needed to more deeply understand that content. There's lots of ways to help build background knowledge. We know a lot of our students come to school without a lot of that prior knowledge. Read-alouds, really rich, fabulous read-alouds are fantastic for that. Videos, the internet, connecting new content to familiar content, having big oral discussions in class, creating semantic maps. All of those things are ways that can help to build students' background knowledge. Another important piece is vocabulary. And there's a strong need to provide students with direct instruction of vocabulary for specific texts. It's important that we provide them a lot of repeated exposure to vocabulary items, and not only to help children learn the meanings of specific new words, but also to become better at figuring out meanings of new words themselves while reading independently. Lots of different ways that we can work on teaching vocabulary. Pre-teaching words before presenting a text, providing repeated exposures in different contexts, choosing words that are meaningful to the student, having a real focus on academic vocabulary, teaching them how to do word analysis. These are all great ways to provide quality vocabulary instruction. So then to wrap up, I would go over again the simple view of reading is a model for understanding how children learn to read. The model states that reading comprehension is a product of word recognition times multiplied by language comprehension. Students must be successful in both areas in order to comprehend written text. Then Scarborough broke those two areas down into smaller strands. So both models are useful for teachers who are teaching children to read. Instruction must consist of explicit instruction in both word reading and language comprehension. Further, if a student is struggling with reading comprehension, it is critical to assess which area of the rope is causing the problem, and then the interventions provided should be targeted to those specific areas of struggle. Then here is the feedback form that I would give my participants. Ask them to rate on a scale of 1 to 5 if the presentation was organized, if the presenter was knowledgeable and engaging, if the information was relevant, if they learned something new, if it was aligned with their building goals, and then a place to ask any further questions that they might have. And then those are my references, and that is no.